what did Democrats in Olympia say over and over and over again Senate Bill 5599 was really about? They said it was about one thing and one thing only: shelter.
What this does is provides a shelter for runaways and homeless youth. Right. We're not talking about the other things that you're referring to as well.
This bill is about providing housing security for our trans youth.
This bill is about our LGBTQ youth that are sleeping on the streets.
Am I going to let them stay out on the street, homeless, at risk? At risk.
Again, that is what this bill is intended to do, to ensure that these youth have access to safe housing.
The goal of this bill is to get kids off the street and somewhere safe.
This bill is about shelter.
This bill is about getting kids housed. That's what this bill is about.
Just about shelter. Just about making sure that kids aren't homeless. And when you word it like that, who could be opposed to a bill like that? This is about particularly transgender youth who are at risk, making sure that they're not sleeping out on the streets. Of course, that's dangerous. And meanwhile, those of us who were concerned because of the way the bill was written, that this would not only help make it easier for kids to make really serious medical decisions without their parents, but that taxpayers might be on the hook for some of these medical decisions from kids. And the pushback we got was astounding. It was unlike anything I've experienced personally. The attacks, the viciousness that persists today. We've talked about them. There are still political candidates who get attacked by the left for being tied to me because I supported the referendum to repeal Senate Bill 5599. But now, everything we feared about that bill has been confirmed. So for the past couple months, there has been a process taking place behind the scenes led by the Department of Commerce. And what this process has been doing is trying to award grants, $1.8 million in grants, to entities that are going to help carry out Senate Bill 5599. And all of this information, by the way, is available on the Department of Commerce website. So according to the Department of Commerce, up to $1.8 million is available in taxpayer funds. It's a grant opportunity for organizations to provide supportive services for youth seeking protected health care under 5599. So they anticipate awarding 4 to 6 applicants with grants anywhere from $300,000 to $450,000. They list out what are protected health care, gender-affirming reproductive health care that we're discussing. They say that that could be gender-affirming health care, puberty blockers, HRT, voice training, surgeries, birth control. So they're saying that this $1.8 million is specifically for organizations who are going to help provide supportive services to youth who might be seeking these things. You know, we already know that under Washington state law, kids 13 and over, they can make certain medical decisions on their own. 5599 didn't change that. So what kind of supportive services are we talking about here that this grant money could go to? To providing transportation costs. Maybe you got a kid who needs transportation to a shelter, maybe a bus or an airline ticket, transportation to a medical facility. It can also go to helping them obtain identification documents. It can go to educational purposes. It can go to employment. So maybe you need some sort of certification costs or training or licensing, clothing for an interview. It can also help pay for a hotel or a motel to house one of these runaway youths. It can pay for legal services, housing support. If you ran away from home, you need a place to live long term because you're not going back home. They can use this to pay for your housing. And then at the bottom, with a little asterisk, it said, please note that gender-affirming or reproductive health care items are allowable support service costs, and that this list is being updated. Please note that gender-affirming or reproductive health care items are allowable support services. Okay. So they then updated their graphic on how this funding can be used. Again, this is funding directly tied to organizations that are going to help carry out the mandate of Senate Bill 5599. And I want you to pay attention to a few things. Medical advocacy. So taxpayer funds connected to 5599 can be used by these organizations to engage in medical advocacy for these youth. helping them navigate insurance, helping them understand their rights, navigating parental consent, transportation, and medical costs. Medical costs. So yes, people who might have feared that Senate Bill 5599 would result in taxpayers funding some of these procedures for kids, some of these medical interventions, you were correct. It also says that this money can be used for gender-affirming supplies and reproductive care supplies. And I'm going to come back to this, but just note, it also says legal services, that the money can be used for legal services. So there's also, when they were talking about who's going to receive these grants, right? What organizations are going to get a piece of that $1.8 million to provide shelter for these youth who have run away from home to seek protected health care. And remember, they also told us protected health care can be a variety of things. Yes, I mean, it can be, some sort of gender care, but it can also be an abortion and reproductive care. But in their own words from the Department of Commerce, there is a type of organization that will be prioritized for these grants above all others. It says, based on what we've learned from community members most impacted by this work, we also plan to prioritize the following in our award decisions. They said they will prioritize proposals that provide support to youth seeking gender-affirming care. So their priority in doling out this $1.8 million is explicitly to organizations who are going to help youth get gender-affirming care. That's where they want this money to go. That's how they want this money to be used. Now, for those of you who might say, well, Brandi, if these kids want gender transition surgery, under state law, they still need parental consent for that. And that's true, partly. Remember, Washington State has something called the mature minor doctrine. And the mature minor doctrine can make it so that someone under the age of 18 could make any medical decision by themselves as long as they can get a healthcare provider to certify that they are a mature minor. So what does a medical provider have to consider when deciding whether a 14, 15-year-old, 16-year-old is a mature minor? So a doctor presented with a minor would have to consider these things and decide if one or more of them are true. Do they have freedom from parents or guardian? Meaning, do they live apart? Are they living apart from their parents and managing their own affairs? They would weigh the age and maturity. Are they self-supporting? So are they financially independent from their parents? Are they involved in a work training program? They would also have to say, does the youth have training and experience to make a knowingly intelligent healthcare decision? And generally, does the youth demonstrate that they have the conduct of an adult? So why do I detail that? Because again, we were made out to be absolute fearmongers that Senate Bill 5599 doesn't change anything around access to healthcare for kids. This is about, remember, shelter. This is simply about shelter. We're giving them a safe place to be, and everything else, they're gonna make those decisions on their own. The government's not gonna make it easier for a kid to go in and get a gender change. But here's the thing. I want you to take into consideration everything we just laid out and look at it this way. So when we consider Washington State's mature minor doctrine, which allows for a kid to make even extreme medical decisions like gender transition surgery, if they can find a healthcare provider who will say, you're a mature minor. And what are the standards for that again? One of them is freedom from parents. Now, I would ask you, what is Senate Bill 5599 facilitating? It's facilitating freedom from parents. Taxpayer funds that are going to go to these entities to help them support these kids for things like transportation. identification, education, employment, housing support. What is that facilitating? That is facilitating freedom from parents. So the government has put everything in place for these young people to run away from home, be protected at a shelter from their parents knowing where they are, and then they are using and awarding grants with taxpayer funds to help facilitate that minor, regardless of age, to be living a life free and independent from their parents. The taxpayer funds are going to help them get everything they need to be able to go to a medical provider and say, and argue that I'm a mature minor, including, as I mentioned earlier, legal services. So including, potentially, a child using taxpayer funds under Senate Bill 5599, taking advantage of free legal services paid for by the taxpayers to officially break from parental custody. This isn't conspiracy stuff. This is very clearly laid out. And again, what did they tell us when we brought this stuff up for months? They told us this is about shelter. This isn't controversial. This is about getting homeless kids off the street. How could you be opposed to that? No, this is a whole infrastructure that is designed and supported through taxpayer funds to pry kids away from their parents and keep them there, and give kids the power and the independence to make a whole bevy of medical decisions without the consent of their parents.